Summary of The Miracle Worker by William Gibson. Helen Keller was born into a rich family in Alabama in the 1880s. Helen has a fever, so Captain Arthur Keller and his second wife, Kate Keller, call a doctor. Soon after that, they find out that Helen can no longer see or hear. Helen is now a little girl after 5 years. She can't talk to anyone, so she spends her days running around, acting up, and sometimes hurting other kids. Her family doesn't do much to change her behavior. Sometimes, even when Helen has been bad, Kate gives her candy as a treat. James Keller, Helen's half-brother from Arthur's first marriage, doesn't think Helen will ever learn to read or write, so he offers that Arthur send Helen to an institution. Kate is still cautiously hopeful, even though Helen's parents have called in a lot of doctors to teach her. She tries to help a girl called Annie Sullivan. People find out that Annie Sullivan grew up in Massachusetts. She and her loving brother James Sullivan had a hard childhood and lived in an almshouse for many years. James died when Annie was still young, and she seems to blame herself for what happened. She thinks she broke her promise to her brother that she would always look after him, so she vows to never break another promise to a child. Annie was almost blind as a child, and she went to the Perkins Institute for the Blind to learn how to see. There, she had surgery to get her eyesight back. Onognos was her teacher at Perkins. He taught her a lot and made her want to become a teacher herself. Annie can see again, but she wears smoked glasses a lot to protect her sensitive eyes from bright lights. When Annie gets to the Kellers' house, she meets Helen. To the Kellers' surprise, Annie takes a more active, hands-on approach than any of her peers. She gets on the floor with Helen and sometimes punishes her strongly when she does something wrong. Annie starts by showing Helen how to sign words like dog, doll, and cake. This is the most important thing she does. Annie tells James, who doesn't believe her, that it's important for Helen to remember these signs so that she can understand in the future that they mean real things. At first, Helen doesn't want to work with Annie. She hits Annie and locks her in her room at one point, then hides the key. Annie is angry, but she won't leave. Annie is able to get Helen to work with her as time goes on, but she understands that Helen will never learn sign language unless she has complete power over her, without Arthur and Kate's help. Arthur doesn't trust Annie's way of teaching, and he thinks about sending her back to Massachusetts at one point. With Kate's help, he changes his mind and lets Annie stay. Annie will teach Helen for 2 weeks by herself in the garden house outside the Keller home. In the meantime, James keeps fighting with his father. At one point, he says that after he married Kate, Arthur forgot everything. Annie teaches Helen how to be nice and organized bit by bit in the garden house, where she is alone. She keeps trying to teach Helen sign language, but she knows Helen still doesn't get it. In the meantime, Kate tells James to stand up to the world instead of always being angry with his father. Kate and James decide they want to be friends. After 2 weeks, Arthur and Kate get ready for Helen to move back into their house. Helen starts to act badly as soon as she gets back home and learns that no one is going to punish her anymore. Helen spills a pitcher of water at dinner, so Annie gets mad and drags Helen out of the room. Arthur is about to stop Annie from doing this, but James stands up to his father and asks, "Has it never occurred to you that you might be completely wrong once in a while?" Outside, Annie moves Helen's hand over water from a water pump and then makes the sign for water on Helen's hand. Helen gets what Annie is doing, which surprises Annie. Helen even says wah wah. Annie shouts, she knows, and shows Helen the signs for things like mother and teacher. When Helen first talks to Kate, she spells out the word teacher, which makes Kate happy and sad at the same time. At the end of the play, Annie hugs Helen and uses sign language to say, "I love Helen forever and ever."
About the author. William Gibson grew up in New York City and went to City College of New York, where he was involved in acting. In the 1940s, Gibson wrote a few books, plays, and collections of poems, but they didn't do very well. He had to work in a mental center to make a living, and his time there gave him ideas for his 1951 book The Cobweb. In 1958, he got his big break when his play 2 for the Seesaw was picked up by Broadway. The famous actor Henry Fonda and the soon-to-be famous Anne Bancroft were both in the play, which was a big hit. Gibson's second show on Broadway, The Miracle Worker, was even more popular than his first. Both plays were turned into great movies in the future. Gibson never wrote another play that did as well on Broadway as his first two, but he continued to write a lot until his death in 2008.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.